David Voigt, WB6TOU, out of the Lodi area. With me is Martin, he's right over there, and Brian, he's right next to him. Those are the other two that are collaborating on this presentation. We're going to be talking about balloon activity, high altitude balloons, Picoballoons, and radiosondes in the greater Bay Area, I guess is the way it's said, because we go out to the Central Valley as well. I'm going to spend almost all of my time talking about Picoballoons, which are those. They go to a certain altitude and they stay there for a long time. They carry a little transmitter, and I'm going to focus on the balloon itself because it turns out it's rather difficult to do that well. There are two types of balloons that are within the reach of the ham community financially, basically. Is the bursting latex balloons. These are the ones the weather balloon people use that Brian will be talking about. And then the Picoballoons, which are much smaller. Those guys will use about 100 cubic feet of hydrogen. These will use about 5. You can use helium if you're paranoid, but the explosion is fun. These are floating superpressure balloons. Let's look at the difference between the two of these. The high altitude balloons that burst, again, they're commercially, many of them are made. They're very predictable. They will do what you want. They will come down pretty much where you expect them to. And if you have had the wisdom to not land into a pot field, they're easy to recover. Otherwise, high altitude, you can carry up to 12 pounds. They use APRS to tell you where they are. Almost all of them made of latex. They use batteries, short duration tests. If you want to do something to measure x-rays or something like that, these will work out great for you. The superpressure balloons have a completely different objective. They'll stay up for days to months, provided you've got the balloon set up right. They'll go around the world, so they have long endurance. I think we'll see the number someplace else. I believe the record for the cheap balloons is something like 305 days. They will stay pretty much a constant altitude, 38 to 43,000 feet. We're kind of restricted to that from the balloons we can buy. There are limitations on what we can pull off. 10 to 20 grams is the payload. It's currently best operating with Whisper. That's evolving, but that allows you to know where it is pretty much all the time. Payload is virtually never recovered. I'll show you the path of my best balloon. It's currently just slightly north of Kabul, Afghanistan. If you've got any volunteers, you're welcome to go get it for me. I would love it back. The balloons are multi-layer plastic that limits permeability and allows things to stick together, photovoltaic powered. And the science opportunities, which I think are kind of interesting because it lets you do STEM projects and get kids involved and so forth, are developing where the beacons are programmable, 10 milliwatt thingy-dingies, and you can put your own sensors on them. You just have a weight issue that you have to cope with, but you can maybe measure things going on in the atmosphere for a month or two.
What is APRS?
The position reporting service, it's an automatic position reporting service. Yeah. Okay, here's an illustration of the atmosphere. We live down here. Just for the record, Captain Kirk just recently went into space. So that defines it. This is the final frontier. Okay, I also marked where the Mars helicopter flies in terms of the thinness of the air, which will give you a realization it's pretty impressive. And our balloons float here, either slightly below the tropopause or in the tropopause, depending on the way Mother Nature is behaving. You can see the definition of the tropopause is where it stops getting colder and then it starts getting warmer in the stratosphere and so on. Looking closer at the bottom, so we're floating someplace around here. Commercial aviation is here. The highest mountains are below us. The thunderstorms and other weather are below us. Almost all the time, thunderstorms are actually an issue. They'll take a few down. But that's where we are. as far as I know, nobody else is really hanging around there. People go through it, but they don't stay there. So it's actually an interesting STEM project opportunity because nobody else is there. So let's talk briefly about how these balloons float, because most people don't really even think about it, and it's kind of an exotic concept. First, let's make sure that we're comfortable with the idea of an ideal gas. If you had a high school chemistry class, you've seen this. If you've had any luck, you've forgotten it all. So let's do a quick review. An ideal gas talks about particles that do not attract or repel, and they never run into each other. Each and every particle thinks it's the only one there because it doesn't see anything else. If you have a mole of that, which is a convenient number for chemists, it's irrelevant to us in terms of what it is, unless you're into batteries, and then the number of electrons and moles and stuff matters. But each mole of it will occupy about 22.4 liters at normal ground level. And anybody who's a perfectionist, I'm rounding these things out for ease of discussions. A mole of air will weigh about 29 grams. A mole of hydrogen will weigh about 2 grams. And the difference, 27 grams, is the lift you're going to get off of 1 mole of hydrogen. That's going to be about an 11-inch cube. Think of it as a cubic foot. You're good. As the gas expands going up with altitude, both the air and the lifting gas expand the same. So that lift stays the same all the way up until later. So just to talk about the SBS-13 balloon, which is the high-quality one made in San Jose, that is a really good thing to start with, because you don't have to do very much to make it work well. You just follow instructions. It weighs about 105 grams. If you're carrying about 15 grams of payload and you put 5 moles of hydrogen in, you will find that you weigh 130 grams. Your lift is 135. You've got an extra 5 grams of lift. Not very much. That's what's going to take you up. And it's going to take you up to 43,000 feet. And then we're going to see it stop. The way to know what's going on more completely is to use a spreadsheet, Float1G, which I'll show you later, that does the detailed calculations with a standard atmosphere set of data and so forth that will give you an awfully good idea of where this balloon will stop rising and stay. The important point is when the gas volume inside the balloon reaches the volume that the bag is, that the balloon itself is, can't expand anymore. Now the density is fixed. The air outside is that basically that density at that point, but you still have some lift because of the light gas. It'll rise a little bit more, the air gets thinner, and finally it finds a place where it's got an equilibrium that it stays. Inside the balloon is a little higher pressure than outside. That difference is the super pressure. Put too much in there, pops, and you're down on the ground and you've thrown away everything. So that's the basics of the mechanism of this balloon. Here's what an SBS-13 looks like. That, of course, is me holding it there. When it's inflated, it has a volume of 1/2 cubic meter or thereabouts, very high quality. And compared to what we're going to refer to in a while as the clear Chinese balloons, the permeability that gas can get through the plastic is about 1/6 of what the Chinese balloons do. That's irrelevant at altitude, but useful to know when you're preparing for a launch. So $165 each, thereabouts, maybe $175. I'm not really sure what they're selling for right now. Because of its size, it has a better ratio of volume to weight. That gives it the height advantage. The clear Chinese, we'll see, don't do quite as well, but they are much cheaper and will last quite a while. So AliExpress sells them for about $1.50 each in quantities of 10 or 20, whatever you want. Quality is lousy. It's variable. So you can expect that you've got some work to do to sort out the losers. Because the last thing you want to do is send up a balloon that isn't going to last. So the stretched volume of each balloon is going to be a little under 0.2 cubic meters, and you usually need 2 of them to carry the kind of payload that you want. If you want to carry a larger payload, you just need more balloons, but you're still going to be floating around 38,000 pretty much no matter what you do. Okay, and the record, as I had mentioned, that I'm aware of, and there may be more, is 305 days. An amazing amount of endurance for a balloon that costs $1.50. Okay, pre-stretching the balloons is, in my mind, critical. I know some people don't do them, but I think they're nuts. The film is not as reliable as you want, and every now and then when you stretch it, it pulls apart, makes what we're calling a pinhole leak, and you're going to stay up if that happens. They also will burst at about 0.6, 0.65 psi. You're going to stretch them to about 0.55 in order to get the volume that you want. And after they've held for 4 days or 5 days, whatever you feel like, if they're still there, you probably got a good balloon to get going. The equipment to do this is actually pretty simple, although you don't see it. The air pump is an aquarium air pump, very simple thing. That's a $30 manometer gauge from eBay. In order to control pressure so that it doesn't just keep going up, I've got a bubbler tube, so a line goes into that, and I set the water depth to control the pressure, and then these balloons just sit, and you wait. If they blow up, throw them away, put another one in place, keep doing that until you've got what you want. Okay, so how to prepare for launch. That's, of course, when the gas is going to be put into the balloon. You must know the balloon's volume, the balloon and payload weights, the type of gas you can use. You can use helium if you're a chicken, and the desired free lift that you want. For SBS 13s, it's probably best just follow their instructions, because at 165, 175, I don't care where they pop, I don't want to know it. But you use about 6.5 grams of lift. Experience says that's a good level. It'll maybe survive a little higher, but that's good. For the clear Chinese, 4 to 8 grams. Because of their geometry, they're a little tougher than the SBS probably is. So a higher lift is worth doing to get the performance. Same spreadsheet. That's where you get the spreadsheet, written in from a group in England. They explain all the math on it. Just download it and get busy. It's all based on ideal gas math. The gas is put in, the lift is measured. When correct, the neck is heat sealed. The balloon is put in a plastic bag or in under a blanket to transport. Beacon carefully carried along, and usually it's assembled at the launch site, simply because try to do it otherwise it gets a little ungainly. Okay, here's the screenshot of float 1G. You're going to tell it the gas, the free lift you want, the volume of your balloons, the weight that it has, what payload weight you're going to carry up. It will do the rest of the math. It will tell you that it's going to float at this level. These are not real numbers. That's saying 14,000 meters. It wouldn't really go that high. And here's your super pressure. And I've added a couple of things to just see how close it is to where I think it's going to blow up. So by now I hope you're getting the realization that these things are delicate. You have to be careful about doing this. Too much and it won't work. Too little, it won't work. And when you do it, it maybe won't work. So you have to pay some attention. So you need to choose a good time and place for the launch. Should be open. No close trees or power lines. I know Martin does it on a wharf, so he's got an ocean a bay to be clear of that sort of thing. The weather should be calm. There should be no clouds to pass through. Wind is going to drive you nuts because it's going to pull the balloon down or allow things to just go bad. You don't want to go through clouds because these things can't carry much weight. You get wet, you have trouble. When you launch, you should take time to look at the predictions. There's software on the web that will tell you where the balloon will probably reach float. You want to make sure that you don't drift over to some place that's going to drag you into a storm. In general, if you send one of these up in the wintertime, it favors circumnavigation simply because the jet stream is more well-behaved at that time. In the winter, it doesn't get as much sunlight, so it doesn't get agitated as much. In the summertime, on the other hand, you get to see these interesting twists and curls that the jet stream will do. The people that you're going to get to help you release the balloon, 2 or 3 guys, should spend a little time getting ready for it, because you want to release the payload when it's underneath the balloon. If you release too early, into the ground. If you release too late, the balloon pulls out into the ground, maybe drag across and do some damage. We've seen that happen. Just, get at least 2 guys that, that are calm and do it. And it's not a bad idea to release a small trial balloon just to see what the air is doing. So here's the course that my best balloon went. And obviously from Lodi, where it was launched, it went around 2.5 times. And I think if you look carefully, you'll see it right there, kind of glistening in the sun, I think. Okay, that's where it's time to turn it over to Mark.
Ham radio offers a couple of ways of getting your position reports and telemetry. You may have heard of APRS, and Whisper is also used. Whisper is weak signal position report and propagation report. And the difference between the two, APRS is a VHF system. That means that it's line of sight. It has reasonably good bandwidth. So 1,200 bits per second, payloads of about 1,000 bits. It doesn't take very long to send out a packet. And the key thing is at altitude, there's an approximation for the radio range circle that you're going to cover. And at 40K, that turns out to be, 40K feet turns out to be 240 miles. We're going to hang on to that number for a second and use it again. So the 50-bit payload is really kind of limiting. That gives you just 4 characters of grid square, and we've come up with a system to encode altitude using the power field from the Whisper report. There's 5 bits in there to report power. We've hijacked that to report altitude. So I think that's about it there. David mentioned that for power systems, batteries don't work very well. It really has to be solar. So it's really just a choice of what cells. They're all over the place in cost and weight. AliExpress has these super cheap polycrystalline cells that I think for most applications I could keep my solar stuff under $1. And the only restriction is that it's super fragile. And just learning how to work with this stuff is going to be a real education, because it's like handling potato chips. It's really that flaky. I did this over the pandemic and suffered parts going unavailable constantly. The GPS receiver I was using was a U-Blocks. That the factory in Japan that was stamping those out burned down just as I was getting started with this. And those were the first parts to go unavailable. I was paying more than $12 for that receiver and found a Chinese replacement at $350, and I've been sticking with it. The microcontroller that I'm using currently is an 18 mega 328. That's what you'd find in an Arduino Mini or something like that. And I've also used a 1284 for more memory and pins and stuff like that. Radio transmitters can be all over the place. For a HAB, it's just as easy to throw in a light HT as anything else. I'm using a clock generator and a TXCO for under $4 and under a gram. And that puts out 10 milliwatts, which is totally adequate for what we're doing. Antenna systems really should be cheap and light. I tried stranded silver wire and it didn't really buy anything, so you'll see what I'm doing in a minute. I'm using JLC PCB for stamping out PCBs. From the time you submit your Gerbers to the time that you have the PCBs in your hand is about a week. And it's 5 boards for $2 plus shipping. It works out to about $2 a board. And I'm using the half-weight PCB material. That's 0.8 millimeters, and that works out that my tracker PCB is 3 grams by itself. And there's a number of skills that I had some background with, but over the pandemic it gave me an opportunity to do a deep dive into a lot of these things, and I got a lot better at it. And yeah, good stuff. So you've probably seen an inspection microscope with a white ring. That was super handy. Hot air rework tool is how, between a soldering iron and a hot air rework tool is how I do most of my soldering. The GPS module has a lot of thermal mass, and I had a lot of problems soldering it until I finally got a hot plate for it. And that's a super useful tool. I had a lot of problems with noise in the GPS band, and used an SDR field probes from AliExpress and software to make a spectrum analyzer that worked really well. So this was my very first attempt, and besides being ugly and heavy, it had a problem with the ARPS locking up, which turned out to be a problem with QRP labs as well. Their solution was to put a can over the microcontroller and so on. It's basically all that RF was getting into the microcontroller and locking it up. So let's see, here's the uVox GPS module that went unavailable. I'm using a BMP 180. So in APRS, you typically send pressure and temperature, and I just used one of those modules to get it on the air. 1284B microcontroller. Let's see, clock generator, TXCO, and each one of these is like a half gram, so there was an awful lot of stuff I learned about reducing weight of these things. The VHF transmitter weighed 6 grams. So altogether, this thing, just this weighed 12 grams. My current tracker, with the solar adds about 5 to 6 grams, and this whole thing weighs 9.5 grams. So that's good enough for right now. It could be improved upon, but save it for later. This is what I'm using for a driven dipole. I use a 34 AWG counterpoise as well, but this is fishing line, magnet wire taped together with Kapton, and it's super fiddly putting it together and deploying it, but it works great. Even though it has 4 ohms, it gets out just fine, and it's 1.5 grams. This is what I was looking at for the GPS 20 megahertz of input. There's this crazy spike that is the product of the TXCO, and I changed TXCO frequencies just to see what would happen, and it just moved around in the band but never went away. GPS is supposed to be jam-proof, so I'm not sure if that's actually what was causing my problem, or is this the crazy loud noise floor. And I've been improving my PCB design and getting QRM under control. I'm just proud of this is the smallest fix I ever attempted. That's a through hole for a pin header, and you can drum the saw filter through the pin hole. But I did manage to get that soldered on there and it worked, but it didn't solve my QRM problem. So APRS sends down lots and lots of data. Location, course, altitude, speed, telemetry, and so on. You see over here that it also has something called a path, and it's complaining about a seriously bad path. It's using 2/1, which means that upon receipt at a digipeater, it'll get repeated twice. And remember, we said that we're flying with a 240-mile range circle. We might be hitting a lot of digipeaters who will be repeating that twice and causing a lot of grief on the APRS community. When I got started, I was flying in DC, and Bob Brunenga, who invented APRS, was in Annapolis, and he was really mean about not letting us use 144.390 for balloon usage, for exactly, and we're not using paths, we transmit every 2 minutes, we weren't causing congestion, but he just didn't like the idea of it, and we didn't do it. So, with 4 characters of grid square, you get a pretty coarse location. You zoom in a little bit with the 6-character grid square. Here's the power field that we were using for coarse altitude, and I wish that was better. So if you ever use WSJT Whisper, the first thing to point out is that we're using type 2 or type 3 messages to get that second frame for the additional 2 characters of grid square and some more telemetry and stuff like that. So leave that unchecked so that your position reports will go up on the net and help us out. Here's a case of where everybody else is sending 6 grid squares, and we have one with a, 4 characters of grid square and 6 characters of grid square. So there's all sorts of really interesting things that we could be doing with HABs and Picoballoons. I hadn't heard of anybody doing a Pico cam, and so I located a 5-gram, 5.8 gigahertz FPV cam and came up with a solar array to power it. I just haven't had time to put that together, but that would be a lot of fun. I got 16 dB gain, directional antenna. Let's see if we can track it and so on. So one of the cool things about this is with drones, you're restricted to 400 feet of altitude, but we don't have those restrictions. So we'll at least get a higher view for a little bit. Okay, and this is as far as I've made it on 2 cheap balloons and a homemade tracker. And I'll turn things over to Brian.
My name is Brian, KF6, ZEO. And so David at the beginning talked about kind of filling the balloon and making sure that the lift is correct. Martin just talked about the electronics involved and Whisper and APRS and all the different things you can do with that. And I'm going to talk about kind of what happens after you release the balloon. If you're releasing a latex balloon, predict.habhub.org is a great website that will predict where your balloon is going to burst and where it'll land. And hopefully you are launching from a good location, like we picked here because we wanted to land in the Central Valley. So usually you want to pick your landing location rather than your launch location. Where's here? This is down just south of Davis in the Central Valley. This was one of our bursting latex balloons that we launched about a year ago, I think. High Split, which is software from NOAA, which the screenshot there is on the right side. That's used for super pressure balloons and trying to figure out where they're going to float. And so the question is, where do these 2 programs get their data from? Where does the upper atmosphere wind info come from? And kind of a more general question, we've got these nice graphics online in the 6 o'clock news, and they're going to say, hey, there's going to be a big windstorm coming. Where does that data come from? And the answer to that is this data comes from radiosondes. So radiosondes are latex balloon transmitters. I have one here, we got a bunch of them. And these directly measure the upper atmosphere winds, temperatures, and humidities from the ground up to about 30,000 meters, which is about 100,000 feet. So this data from the radiosondes gets fed back into this huge global model called Global Forecast System that NOAA runs every 6 hours. And from that model, you can look at where a volcanic ash is going to go, where manned hot air balloons are going to float, where pico balloons are going to float, and especially relevant for California, if we have wildfires and the smoke from that, where that smoke is going to blow. So as I said before, the radiosondes directly measure the upper atmosphere winds. They're on disposable latex balloons. Worldwide, there's approximately 1,300 launch sites around the world, and there's 2 radiosondes launched per day from each one of these sites. So this is kind of a big operation. 2,600 radiosonde launched per day for the past 50, 75 years. We have a local radiosonde station here at Oakland International Airport. And I do want to point out that this is not directly related to ham radio, but it is ham radio adjacent. This one broadcasts at 403 megahertz. Other ones broadcast at 1680 megahertz. And there's a lot of overlap between the amateur radio community and the radiosonde receiving community. This is a Vaisala RS-41. Weighs 84 grams, which is 3 ounces. 60 milliwatt transmitter at 403 megahertz, and it's 4800 baud GFSK. So a typical radiosonde flight, they're launched twice per day at 1100 and 2300 UTC, which right now is 4 a.m. and 4 p.m. Pacific time for another couple weeks. The balloon ascends at 5 meters per second, which is about 10 miles an hour for an hour and a half. up to 30,000 meters where it pops and then it falls to the ground, taking about a half hour to fall. So 2 hours is kind of the entire flight of a radiosonde. This is the auto launcher at Oakland International Airport, where they load up 60 radiosondes, good for a month, and just press the go button, and every 12 hours it just launches another one, and everything, all the data gets fed back into the National Weather Service systems. The picture on the right there is all the radiosondes that are launched here in North America, quite a few of them.
Are they using helium or hydrogen for this?
They use hydrogen. Helium's too expensive. And actually, interestingly enough, at some of the remote sites, up in Canada, I visited one up in Inuvik, they actually generate the hydrogen there on site because it's too expensive to either fly it in or ship it in. So they just electrolyze water for the hydrogen. It's really easy to receive radiosondes using an RTL SDR dongle. $25 online. There's even cheaper ones out there. Radiosonde Auto RX is a program that runs on Linux, even in a Docker container. It has a really nice graphical user interface where you can see where the radiosonde is on a nice map. It tells you the telemetry. They also have a version that runs on a TTGo LoRa chip. The data that you receive on your station goes up to the internet, up to sf-hab, which is kind of a global clearinghouse of all the radiosonde information, as received by amateurs. And so even if you don't have a radiosonde receiving station at your home, you can just go online and see where all the balloons are in flight, which is pretty cool. So looking at the ones launched from Oakland, this is where they've all landed for the past 9 months. So they're launched from right about here, and they just float with the winds, and wherever the winds take them is where they land.
Are they retrieved or they just?
So these are disposable.
Okay.
It says right on there, do not send it back. So they're just trash. So it's easy to collect them, right? They broadcast their position. This is the setup that I use when I go track radiosondes. Dual band mag mount on the roof, RTL SDR plugged into my laptop. I always recommend that you have someone else drive so you can sit there and navigate and pilot and look at the maps and determine where you're going to go. As with any balloon launch, if you're launching from private property or if it lands on private property, make sure to ask for permission to pick up the radiosonde or the high altitude balloon. But if you're in an urban area like around here, it's mostly parking lots and roads, so there's a really good chance that you'll be able just to drive up to where the landing site is and just pick it up and be on your merry way before anybody knows what's actually happened. sf-hab, which is that website I referenced, does predictions as the balloon is falling. So as it gets closer and closer to the ground, it will kind of narrow in on a target. You can be like, okay, well, it's probably going to land close to the intersection, drive there, and then you might even be able to see it fall out of the sky, which I have done once. So these are some of the recoveries that I have done. Top left is down in Sunnyvale. Top right is Bernal Hill in San Francisco. I just biked there one morning. Here's the radiosondes in the gutter in San Bruno. And this was behind some houses in a creek down in Mountain View, almost a year ago. So what can you do with the radiosondes? The National Weather Service doesn't want these back at all. They're disposable. So if you don't want them, you can toss it. Or there's actually a couple programs, projects online from OM3BC and DF8OE, where you can reprogram the electronics on here to transmit in the 430 megahertz amateur radio bands for APRS. There's also really slow CW. It's kind of a general purpose transmitter and microcontroller, so there's a lot you can do with it. You can also scavenge it for parts if you want. There's 2 AA's that will last for a while longer. Microcontroller, GPS, and there's also a pressure sensor on the back that could be fun to play with. So once you have, if you do set up a station at home, besides the usual ones that launch from Oakland and land in Central Valley, occasionally there'll be some special radiosonde launches. when we have a big atmospheric river event in the wintertime, when we have a big blast of rain that comes up from the tropics, UC San Diego launches a bunch of radiosondes from Bodega Bay and just north of Yuba City, and they're looking at kind of the water content within these big atmospheric rivers. So that's fun to watch those balloons. They launch them every couple hours from both locations. Rocket launches down at Vandenberg. They release radiosondes before the rocket launches to see what the upper atmosphere winds are doing to make sure the rocket doesn't get blown too far off course, and program the rocket to let it know about the upper atmosphere winds. There's also this random one that's down here. Who knows where that one came from? There was a project this summer out in Monterey that was looking at winds and waves on the Monterey Bay. So they were launching 5 radiosondes per day for a couple of months. And then also CAL FIRE launches radiosondes when there's a big fire, like the Caldor fire this past summer, and they're looking at which way the wind's going to blow and if there's going to be any hot winds to come in and stoke up the fire even more. So that's kind of all I had for radiosondes here in the Bay Area. Questions? Yes?
How much do they cost?
I don't know how much they cost, but it can't be that expensive since our, Oakland launches 720 a year, times 100 sites, and across the U.S. So yes, question in the back.
Did they ever fall on your head or on the car to cause damage?
I haven't heard of any falling and causing any damage. It's only 3 ounces, but conceivably it could. Are there any other questions also about what David or Martin talked about earlier? Yes, in the back.
Well, I just had a comment to David that since you guys have started this project and launching these balloons, they're great for school-age children.
Absolutely.
STEM classes, a great tool for teaching geography. A certain amount of suspense is involved and where this balloon is going, the air currents, and will it survive the night? Will it survive crossing the Atlantic? Will it survive crossing the Pacific? So, for school-age children or high school, I think there's a great interest in this.
Yeah, I did give a presentation to, I think it was a third grade class. The kids ate it up, and they unfortunately watched Up, and so I had to explain how many balloons it would take for them to go up. They're having fun when you're doing that.
It's an adventurous project.
Yeah.
So is it legal in California to release such balloon?
Well, you've got all those weather balloons, and we're less than that. The answer is absolutely yes.
So 5 years ago, I tried to do the Picoballoon, and at that time, so I checked the regulations, and so you are not supposed to release any balloon with the wire, right? It's causing some probably fire or something.
So if you look at FAA 101, those are the rules of the road for anything you put in the air. And there's nothing in there that says you can't do what we're doing.
Yeah. So one sentence says that if scientific research purpose, it's fine, but otherwise it's not.
No, that's not
Really?
so. I have
So
talked
maybe from the
to.
PG&E. Yeah, so that's why I stopped doing that.
Yeah.
So
I have talked to air traffic control in the Bay Area. I mean, I'm a pilot from way back when, and I've gone through the Stockton Tower and the air traffic control.
Like Myler, no, I'm not against it. So I'm just curious, because for instance, the Myler balloon.
We're not flying Myler.
Yeah, I
These are
know.
not them.
But with wire, right?
Well, we
34
got wire.
gauge wire.
How
Can you
long is the
imagine
wire?
if that hits a 10,000 volt line, what would happen to it?
So if it's okay, I would like to do it, right?
Yeah,
So
it
I
is
stopped
okay.
doing 5 years ago.
Yeah, if you want to start learning about basically the global community, Picoballoons.io is the group where you get an awful lot of stuff from everywhere.
Yeah, I
And,
read kind of PCB and other
Yeah.
solar panels.
Well, it would be great for you to join our little group.
Yeah, I would like to.
So
Here's the webpage.
please everybody get the webpage because we have lots and lots of resources there. And
cool.
You looked up a way to live for balloon launch?
So it's a 20-meter dipole.
Yeah.
And so I have 17 feet of wire going between the tracker and the balloon.
15 feet?
17
Feet.
feet, yes.
That's right, but you launch it, go away from the power lines.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
It's
there's
so
a,
thin, it would vaporize right away.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, you would never notice it.
Yeah, let me
Yeah, we
expand
will.
a little bit more on the weight issues.
The wire does.
Yeah.
I can show you pictures,
If it's crossfade, you would notice it.
I can show you pictures that were taken of a Mylar balloon that flew into a 115
Yeah.
kV substation by where I live and the damage that it did. I used to work for PG&E.
Yeah, but a 34 gauge wire is a lot less conductive than a Mylar balloon. I have seen them doing, I have video of them testing their breaker systems with piano wires that are 30 and 40 times bigger than the wires that we're using, and they verify that it doesn't cause damage. The Mylar balloon has a lot of surface area and it stays conductive for a period of time.
So another question in the back, in the center, yes?
Is there a requirement for a radar reflector on
No.
the microballoons?
The only requirement that the FAA puts on us is that the individual chunks of mass are no more than 3 pounds. So you can string them together and you can send the 25 pounds or whatever you want. And those are pretty much the bursting balloons, the latex weather balloon kind of thing. For the Pico balloons, who cares at 15 grams? I think that'll go through a jet engine and the guys won't know.
Question for David. I'm a private pilot also. Isn't half a pound going through your windshield of a Cessna problem, or?
Well, these things typically weigh, including the balloon, 100 grams.
So that's,
So it's a few ounces and it's distributed over a huge area,
Yeah.
so I'm not worried.
You know, I don't know that it has ever hit a balloon hit a plane in the windshield. You start looking at the probabilities and at a certain point you say, oh, we don't care.
And we can't ground all the birds that are heavier,
Yeah.
so, you
the
know.
birds are probably.
I'm just curious what your chat with ATC was about. How did it go?
Well, I was trying to understand what about the bursting balloons, because that was where I started understanding this was 3 years ago. It went fine. They said, well, you know, if you're going to send one up at 3 pounds, give us a call. We'll put out a NOTAM.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
So in the HAB world, actually, it used to be really complicated. They have all these difficult questions about where you're launching radials to your closest airports and
Right.
stuff like that.
Right.
These days, you just call the tower and say you're launching a HAB. You let them know where you are. I suspect that they have APRS. They ask for your call.
Yeah.
So they know about you.
But also keep in mind that there's 2 of these that gets launched from the end of the runway at Oakland twice a day for the past 50 years, and presumably they haven't had any problems because they're still doing it.
The NOTAM.
Question in the center back, yes?
Yeah, if all of these are being launched or something, how come I haven't stumbled over one?
It looks like trash, you know, they just kind of, you know, it just looks like trash or it's out in the middle of nowhere.
When I was a kid, we found one in our apricot orchard. You know, it's luck of where they land.
Any other
I've also
questions?
found one.
Yes.
One comment about the ATC, it varies by ATC. So for in San Diego, for example, they want written NOTAMs and full paperwork
Okay.
for the larger payloads. But so my other question was, for the SBS balloons, do you pressure test those like you do the Chinese ones?
I'll be glad to pressure test yours if you take more.
The reason I ask is the last 4 flights we had with SBS, they leaked. And we've had 4 failures in a row, so we're getting really tired of spending $175 at a time.
Yeah, and I have had some problems too. I've had 2 SBS 13s that just quit on me at 40,000 feet. I am questioning the level of quality that the SBS 13 really has. What I know about the advice that the fellows that run it are very talkative. It's a father-son thing, and I'm glad they're there, and they're developing a multi-gore balloon and all that. A lot of respect, but they won't tell you when it ought to burst. They did say if you want to pre-stretch, and that's because they've looked at the Chinese stuff, take it to where the circumference in the middle expands by no more than, I think it's 10%. And I've done that. It's close to a quarter PSI. If you've got a leak problem, you could just pressure test to a 1/4 PSI and cross your fingers, because the chances of a failure are pretty low then. And you know, that might be the right thing to do. Simply because none of these can be absolutely flawless. It's just the best shot you got, and there's only really 2 places to buy anything that will do this job. There is the Qualitex, they're really no better than the Chinese, and they cost more.
What was the total cost? And maybe I missed that.
Okay.
The balloon, the whole thing, or the one that, like the one that you had to all go all the way around?
Back in the day, my total cost was at least $300, maybe $350 to do a flight, because I had to buy everything. He's building, I had to buy because I'm just not that good. And I didn't know where else to go for the balloons. When I found Scientific Balloon Solutions, I went that way. So there was, you know, $350 that's gone. But it was a lot of fun. And
In the name of science.
in the name of science, yes. Viva la ciencia.
So Turkmenistan costs $25 or so.
Wow.
But it's a cheaper Arab country.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Has there
Yes,
anybody,
last one.
asking about getting some balloons and then putting a little pulley on it and hauling up an antenna so we could do some on field day?
You don't have a clue. Knock yourself out, give a presentation next year.
So, for what it's worth, the military does balloon, lots of people do balloon antennas.
Yeah.
And so the issue is that depending on the winds, it may not be possible.
Right.
So if you carry a kite and a balloon, I think you've got all your bases covered.
Great.
And comply with all your FAA rules.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think FAA below 400 feet.
Balloon rules for FAA.
So
There's kite and
Oh,
balloon
yeah.
rules, tethered.
Yeah.
There's tethered rules, so.
All right, guys, thanks everybody for coming. Have a great afternoon.